Before light bulbs, before switches, before even glass windows, how did medieval kings light their vast, cold castles? In an age of stone walls and deep shadows, lighting wasn't just about seeing, it was about power, safety, and survival. From flickering torches to beeswax candles, from glowing hearths to sacred lamps, every flame had purpose, and every shadow had meaning. Join us on a journey back in time, as we explore the forgotten world of castle lighting and how medieval royalty ruled by firelight. This is the story of how medieval kings lit their castles without electricity. Before the buzz of bulbs, before wires crept through walls, and long before anyone could flip a switch, the great castles of medieval Europe rose in stone silence. Perched atop hills or nestled in valleys, these massive fortresses were built not only to defend kingdoms but to reflect the power and wealth of the monarchs who ruled from within. Yet behind their thick walls and stained glass windows, life played out in perpetual twilight. For medieval kings, lighting a castle was not just a matter of practicality, it was a statement of status, strategy, and survival. In the earliest days of castle building, around the 10th and 11th centuries, most lighting came from the most ancient source of all, fire. But unlike the open flames of campfires or the blinding blaze of modern floodlights, the fire in a medieval castle was a managed flame, carefully controlled to prevent smoke, soot, and above all, catastrophic fire. Castles were made of stone, but their floors, ceilings, and beams were often timber. A stray spark could spell disaster. So light had to be used sparingly and wisely. The central hearth was often the heart of the main hall. In early Mon Bailey castles, it might have been a large, open fire in the middle of the great room, with the smoke rising straight up through a vent or hole in the roof. Later, with the evolution of the Norman stone keeps, large fireplaces were built into the walls, with stone chimneys carrying the smoke upward. These wall-mounted hearths became the standard, warming not only the great halls but the private chambers of the king and his family. But fireplaces alone could not light a castle. Their reach was limited. They offered warmth and glow, but shadows still clung to the corners of long corridors, spiral staircases, and storage vaults. So kings turned to torches and candles. Torches, often made from wooden staves wrapped with resin-soaked fabric, were used to light the way down dark halls or during nighttime patrols. But they burned quickly and were smoky, leaving trails of soot along stone ceilings. Servants or guards would carry them by hand or place them in wall-mounted sconces. In wealthier castles, candles became the preferred light source, especially in chambers, chapels, and areas where cleanliness and dignity mattered. But candles were expensive. Beeswax candles, which burned cleanly and with little odor, were prized by the nobility. They were typically reserved for chapels and royal chambers. The more common tallow candles, made from animal fat, were far cheaper but smoked heavily and gave off a strong, unpleasant smell. Most peasants and servants used tallow, while kings and clergy kept the beeswax for sacred or noble spaces. Still, candles alone could not illuminate a whole castle. Their light was faint, and a gust of wind could snuff them out. So in strategic places, near doorways, corners, and stairs, castles were fitted with oil lamps or iron braziers. These open flames, set in stone or metal bowls, burned steadily for hours. Olive oil was the cleanest fuel, but in Northern Europe, animal fat or fish oil was more common, though fouler smelling. But even with every fire, torch, candle, and lamp ablaze, a medieval castle remained a dim place. The thick stone walls and narrow, arrow-slit windows let in little light. Glass was rare and costly. In many places, shutters and oiled parchment-covered windows to block wind and rain, further darkening rooms. To walk through a medieval castle was to walk through a world of flickering shadows, warm glows, and deep pockets of darkness. Yet the darkness itself was useful. It protected against invaders. It preserved privacy. And in its quiet corners, kings schemed, priests prayed, and history unfolded by firelight. In the next part, we'll journey deeper into how medieval lighting was influenced not just by wealth, but by architecture, religion, and ritual. As castles grew larger and more complex, so too did the challenge of lighting them. Kings expanded their domains and their dwellings into sprawling stone fortresses with layered defenses, towering halls, chapels, kitchens, and private quarters. Yet despite the scale and grandeur, these castles remained, by modern standards, deeply dim. That wasn't just a technical limitation, it was also by architectural design. Medieval builders had to strike a balance between light and defense. Castles were, first and foremost, military strongholds. Every window was a potential vulnerability. Narrow slits, called arrow loops, allowed archers to shoot at invaders while remaining protected, but these slits admitted almost no natural light. They lined thick stone walls like eyelids that never fully opened, casting thin blades of daylight across dusty stone floors. But in more private or prestigious parts of the castle, particularly the Great Hall, chapel, and the solar, larger windows became more common over time. These were still small compared to modern windows, but often included tracery, carved stone patterns, and in the grandest castles, colored glass. Glass was a rare luxury in the Middle Ages. Produced by skilled artisans and imported at great expense, it was reserved for only the most elite buildings. A king's chapel might have stained glass windows depicting religious scenes, and the colored panes would throw ruby and sapphire hues across the stone during bright daylight hours, a holy illusion meant to evoke awe and devotion. These colored lights, though subtle, served a purpose beyond beauty. They transformed ordinary space into something divine. In rooms with no access to natural light, lighting became a matter of logistics. Strategic placement of candles and oil lamps helped guide movement. Stairwells, particularly the tight spiral stairs in castle towers, often had small niches carved directly into the stone, little shelves where a lamp or torch could be placed. These lights cast long, flickering shadows that danced up walls and turned corners into hazy thresholds. To walk alone through a medieval stairwell was an eerie experience, the footsteps echoing, the flame flickering, the darkness pressing in. And yet, that sensation of mystery, of secrecy, was something medieval kings often embraced. In the throne rooms and council chambers, lighting was as much a tool of theater as it was necessity. Kings did not always wish to be seen fully. Their faces, half lit in torchlight, became masks of power. The same flickering fire that warmed a chamber could turn a ruler into something more, a figure cloaked in glow and shadow, unpredictable, untouchable. In these grand halls, massive iron chandeliers, known as crown lights, hung from high rafters. Often forged with spikes to hold dozens of candles, these chandeliers were lowered by rope and pulley for lighting and cleaning. They were symbols of wealth, yes, but also tools of atmosphere. During feasts, as meat roasted and wine flowed, the light of the chandeliers shimmered off golden goblets and polished armor, creating an illusion of warmth and abundance in otherwise cold, hard stone. Religion played a part too. In chapels and shrines, light had spiritual significance. Sanctuary lamps, always kept burning, represented the presence of the divine. Candlelight became prayer. Incense smoke mingled with flame. In these sacred spaces, light wasn't just functional, it was sacred. Castles were not blank slates. Their walls shaped the way light moved. Every flicker, every glow, every dim corner told a story. And kings, masters of these stone labyrinths, understood how to use light to project power, faith, and mystery. But there was still more to lighting than fire, oil, or architecture. In the next part, we'll look at the human side of lighting, the workers, rituals, and daily rhythms that kept castles glowing in a world without switches. Behind every flickering torch and glowing hearth in a medieval castle was a pair of human hands, hands that trimmed wicks, stoked embers, and carried fire through darkness. Lighting a king's castle wasn't just a matter of architecture or technology, it was labor. Relentless, careful, and often invisible. Each morning, long before the king stirred, the castle servants rose to begin the process of relighting the great fortress. The embers from the night's fires would be checked. In some hearths, coals were buried beneath ash to preserve heat overnight, a trick as old as fire itself. These smoldering remnants were stirred back to life, fed with kindling and dry logs until flames roared once more. This task fell to the scullions and hearthkeepers, the lowest ranks among the castle staff. Their job was physically demanding. They hauled wood from outdoor stores, heavy bundles often soaked from rain or frost, and carried them through maze-like corridors to the great halls, the kitchens, and the private chambers. Fires had to be tended constantly. Let one go out, and a room could fall into darkness and chill within an hour. Wood, the primary fuel in most castles, had to be seasoned and stored properly. In wealthier households, oak and beech were preferred, they burned longer and cleaner. In less affluent parts of the castle, any available timber would do. Charcoal was also used, especially in braziers or enclosed spaces, as it produced less smoke. Keeping candles burning was an equally intricate task. Candles were precious. Tallow candles, made from rendered animal fat, were common in kitchens, storerooms, and servants' quarters, but they burned quickly and produced a greasy smell and heavy smoke. The more expensive beeswax candles, with their clean, bright flame and sweet scent, were strictly rationed. They were reserved for royal chambers, religious altars, and ceremonial occasions. It was the duty of the chamberlain, or sometimes the steward, to oversee the household's supply of candles. They were counted, stored, and issued with care. Large estates might keep candle records as diligently as they recorded coin or grain. A careless or dishonest servant could be severely punished for misusing candles, especially beeswax ones, which were sometimes imported or harvested from monastery-owned hives. At nightfall, lighting became ritual. The lighting of torches in the great hall or along corridors signaled the transition from work to rest, from public life to private retreat. Guards carried torches as they patrolled, and sconces were placed in key locations, at entrances, stairwells, and along battlements. For special occasions, royal visits, feasts, weddings, the lighting grew elaborate. Dozens of torches and candles would be set in place, casting warm, shifting light across tapestries and armor. Shadows danced on the vaulted ceilings as music played, meat sizzled, and wine poured. These were the nights when castles seemed truly alive. But lighting had its dangers. Open flames in stone castles still posed enormous risks. Tapestries, rush flooring, wooden beams, and thatched outbuildings could all catch fire. Accidents were not uncommon, especially when alcohol flowed freely. A torch knocked loose, a candle left unattended. These could trigger a blaze that even the thickest walls couldn't stop. Many castles throughout history, including famous ones like Windsor and Edinburgh, suffered devastating fires from such causes. So each night, after the castle quieted, another round of labor began, extinguishing. Torches were doused, coals were banked, candles snuffed. Only key fires, those in the kitchen, the main hall, and sometimes the solar, remained lit, their glow pulsing in the silence. Day after day, night after night, the keepers of the flame sustained the rhythm of the castle. They weren't knights or kings, but without them, the fortress would fall into cold and darkness. In the next part, we'll step deeper into how seasons, religion, and social hierarchy influenced light itself, and how the glow of a candle could mark your place in medieval society. In a medieval castle, light did more than brighten a room. It revealed your rank, echoed your beliefs, and shifted with the rhythm of the seasons. It was a symbol, a signal, and a tool of power. To be bathed in light was a luxury. The king's solar, the private chamber of the ruler and his closest family, was one of the best-lit places in the entire castle. With large windows, sometimes glazed with imported glass, and ample access to beeswax candles and warmed hearths, it was a space reserved for comfort, counsel, and rest. In contrast, the lower one's status, the dimmer their surroundings. Servants and guards lived in rooms that might only be lit by smoky torches or single tallow candles, if any flame was available at all. In barracks and storerooms, darkness was simply part of life. Firewood and candles were rationed. Servants often worked and slept by natural light alone, their days ending with the sun. This use of light as a marker of privilege was no accident. Medieval society was structured like a pyramid, with the king at the top and peasants at the base. Illumination echoed this structure. Even in religious contexts, light was used to elevate and separate. In the castle chapel, for instance, candles burned on altars while the congregation stood in the shadows. The flame was seen as a bridge to the divine, pure, flickering, alive. Only the noble, the priest, or the monarch could draw near to it. The church calendar also shaped lighting rituals. Major feast days, such as Christmas, Easter, and the feast of a patron saint, were marked with brilliant light displays. Castle chapels would be flooded with beeswax candles, often arranged in intricate holders shaped like crowns, suns, or sacred symbols. The glow on these nights was said to reflect heaven itself. But light also became scarce, painfully so, during Lent, Advent, or times of mourning. On such days, candles were limited, hearths were subdued, and feasts were held in quieter, dimmer rooms. The lack of light wasn't just atmospheric, it was spiritual. To live in darkness was to reflect humility, penance, and reverence. Seasons, too, played a powerful role. In the long summer days, a castle could rely more on natural light. Activities stretched into the evening and fewer candles were needed. But in winter, when darkness came early and lingered late, castles consumed far more fuel. The burden on firewood, tallow, and beeswax stocks grew. Castle stewards had to plan for the cold months, not just in food and clothing, but in illumination. A miscalculation could leave the household shivering and groping through gloom. In response, lighting was optimized. Mirrors, though rare and primitive, were sometimes used to reflect and amplify candlelight. Polished brass or tin plates might be hung behind wall sconces to boost the glow. Walls were painted in lighter colors where possible, and tapestries embroidered with reflective threads to catch stray flickers. Even the color of the flame mattered. Tallow candles burned yellow and greasy. Beeswax, in contrast, offered a soft, golden-white light that was both purer and brighter. For those who could afford it, beeswax candles weren't just about light, they were about image. Hosting a banquet lit entirely with beeswax was a mark of supreme wealth and refinement. By this time in the late Middle Ages, some castles even experimented with lanterns, metal or wooden frames that enclosed candles or oil lamps with horn, glass, or mica panes. These could be carried or hung, offering safer, wind-resistant lighting during travel or guard duty. But even as these methods evolved, lighting remained deeply tied to power, faith, and season. A single flame might light a king's bedchamber, or guide a lone servant through the bitter dark to tend the fires. In the final part of our story, we'll explore how lighting practices changed at the dawn of a new age, and how the fading glow of fire gave way to a world of innovation and glass. By the late Middle Ages, the castles of Europe stood at the edge of transformation. The world was changing slowly, but unmistakably. Trade routes were expanding. Cities were growing. Ideas from the East and the Renaissance began to filter into even the most remote manors. And with these changes came new materials, new techniques, and a gradual shift in how the great stone castles were lit. Though fire still ruled, in the hearth, in the torch, in the candle, signs of innovation flickered on the horizon. One of the most significant changes was in glassmaking. As techniques improved and production increased, glass windows became more common, even outside of chapels and royal chambers. Castles began to feature larger window openings, often fitted with leaded panes that allowed more daylight to enter while still offering basic insulation. For the first time, rooms that once relied entirely on flame during the day could now bask in natural light, at least for a few hours. The growing use of glass lanterns also changed mobility within castles. Instead of open torches or unprotected candles, portable light could now be shielded behind glass or horn, reducing fire risk and improving visibility during travel. Guards, messengers, and night workers carried these lanterns through corridors and across courtyards, their steady glow cutting through fog and chill. In wealthier courts, lighting also became more decorative. Chandeliers evolved into ornate, gilded pieces of craftsmanship. Candle holders were carved from ivory or cast in bronze. Light was no longer just functional, it was art. Symbolism remained important, but aesthetics began to play a larger role. Even the design of castles subtly adapted. While defense remained key, some newer halls emphasized grandeur over grit. Thinner walls, wider windows, and more elaborate interiors reflected the taste of kings and queens who saw themselves as patrons of culture, not just defenders of strongholds. And with those changes came the need and desire for better lighting. But the heart of it remained the same: fire. Fire lit the meals. Fire warmed the newborn. Fire comforted the dying. Fire witnessed the council, the ceremony, the feast, the execution. It was present in every layer of castle life, from the blazing hearth of the great hall to the smoldering torch in a dungeon corridor. And yet, fire was finite. Candles melted, wood burned, oil ran dry. Entire castle staffs were built around managing this single, elemental force. That would not change until centuries later, with the arrival of gas lamps, then electric wires, and finally the soft click of a switch. But by then, the age of castles had already begun to fade. Stone keeps gave way to palaces. Fortresses became estates. The world of firelit halls and flickering shadows dimmed, but never fully vanished. Today, when we walk through the ruins of a medieval castle or stand in a preserved great hall, we may admire the architecture, the weapons, the carvings. But if we listen closely, past the echo of footsteps and camera clicks, we might still hear the faint crackle of logs, the hiss of tallow, the whisper of fire. Because these places were never meant to shine brightly. They were built to glow softly, strategically, mysteriously. And in that glow, medieval kings ruled. They feasted, prayed, and plotted, lit not by electricity, but by flame, intention, and ritual. That's how medieval kings lit their castles, with fire, not electricity. What surprised you most? Tell us in the comments. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories from history. Thanks for watching.